thank you for joining us tonight. I want to welcome everyone to the University of Montana. We are so excited to have you here. I am President Seth Bodner, and I am so pleased to see such a large crowd for what I know will be a wonderful evening of discussion, of thinking, and of learning. We're honored to have two impressive speakers tonight, along with a host of distinguished guests. And tonight's event really embodies two themes that are central to what makes this university special. And the first is that the University of Montana is and has been, since its inception, a gathering ground for voices, for the informed discussion and debate of important issues. And tonight is a great example of just that. The second theme is the importance of service. And you'll hear us continually emphasize at the University of Montana the nobility of dedicating one's life to the service of our fellow citizen, to the service of our community, this state, this country, and our world. And I'm proud to open tonight's event with an introduction of one of our state's most beloved and well-known public servants. As U.S. Ambassador to the People's Republic of China, and as Montana's senior U.S. Senator, Max Baucus has spent decades embodying the ethic of public service. Throughout his career, he chose over and over a life of service to his native Montana, to his country, and to the world. Every person in this theater has benefited from Ambassador Baucus' service. He most recently served as ambassador to the United States ambassador to China. And he was the senior senator from our great state, in fact, our longest serving senator. And he was the senator with the third longest tenure among those serving in the U.S. Senate. Quite an impressive streak. And I want to say that this man's work influencing international trade and stewarding international policy has been a model not only for those who followed him, for those who've worked with him, but for all of our students and every student across the state of Montana. And so it makes sense that we have created here at the University of Montana the Max S. Baucus Institute. The Baucus Institute is here, it's housed in our Blewett School of Law, and it's built on the premise that policymakers, lawyers, politicians, leading academics, law students can engage in the bipartisan consensus building that is necessary to solve our country's and our world's biggest challenges. The Baucus Institute aims to prepare the next generation of public servants. It's important work. Filling the shoes of Max Baucus is no small task, but I am optimistic when I see the many young people who are learning from his example and who I know one day will be those to whom we look as models of service. And so I would like you to please join me in welcoming Ambassador Max Baucus to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, Seth. That's very generous. I deeply appreciate it. You know, we're so lucky to be here in Montana. I know we all know that, but I just think it's good for us to kind of remind ourselves just how lucky we are. You don't see people want to move to other states unless they have to find a job, but then they all want to find a way to get back to live in our state. It just is who we are as a state. I also want to just give my compliments to our president, Seth Bodner. To be honest, I called a lot of the members of the Board of Regents and I said, you got to hire that guy. He is really good. And I'm glad that the board decided that was the right thing to do. A few years ago, when I was leaving the Senate, I decided Mel and I decided we want to go back home to Montana. But where am I going to put our papers? My gosh, it's 40 years back there, and thousands of boxes of papers. I don't know if anybody's going to read them, but they got to go somewhere. And it wasn't too difficult. Mel and I traveled around the state. We went to Bozeman, we went to Helena, Carroll College, and all around it. Pretty soon it was pretty clear there's only one place to send our papers, and we did send them here to the University of Montana. It's housed over there, and we're just very proud, again, that we're here. It's kind of interesting. We in Montana are also lucky we've had Mike Mansfield representing us. Mike, if I can indulge in a little personal side here, is really my inspiration. He's the main reason I got into public service. And Mike would give little bits of advice here and there. One is, and I decided to enter public service in Washington. He said, Max, when you go home, where are you going to live? And I don't know. He said, whatever you do, don't move to Helena. I knew exactly what he meant. Everybody in Helena is chasing the rumors all around. This is not where the real people live. And I said, no, I want to come to Missoula because that's really what makes sense to me. It's the mountains and it's a university and so forth. And did move to Missoula back in '73 and knocked on a few doors in Missoula. And so my real soul and in the state is Missoula. That's right. Got my start, and it's just been so special to me. We've had another ambassador from Montana, and you may not remember, you might not know, his name was Mike McFall. Mike McFall is from Montana, Bozeman, and he represented the United States over in Moscow. And he got that job, frankly, I'm going to too much detail here, but he's moved all around Montana, and his father was a preacher, ended up in Bozeman, and had to take an English course. So we asked to graduate from high school, what's the easiest English course, he asked. Debate, he was told. So he signed up for a debate. The subject was Jackson Vanek MFN. For those of you who know, that's really the most favored nation training statue that we had at the time. He got so enthralled and interested, so he took Russian language, and the next thing he knew, became a professor and became ambassador over in China. And I think it's in the air. It's in the Montana air. We just like doing stuff, getting all around the world. Mike, all that he did, and Mike McFall, and then my work over in China. Tonight we're here because of two special people. Mel and I would Sunday morning pick up the papers, and we were living in Washington, D.C. Either the Washington Post, New York Times, what are we going to read first? And right away we thought we wanted to read Maureen Dowd. So we went first to the New York Times. We had a fight for the paper. Who's going to be able to get to read Maureen Dowd first? And we finally compromised and said, well, whoever gets the paper will read to the other. And Maureen has been one of my favorite journalists. She's written lots of books, as you know, Pulitzer Prize. One of her books I get a big kick out of is Are Men Necessary? I'm not going to get into that. And but what I like about Maureen so much, and she really has been one of my most favorite columnists, because she's so quick, so clever, and how she just gets to the heart of the matter right away and punctures the balloon of politicians and other public officials whose balloons needs to be punctured. She is very fast, and she's very good and very quick. It just meant a lot to me. So Mel and I decided, how are we going to meet Maureen Dowd? We like her so much. Well, as it turned out that when we'd walk our dog on Capitol Hill, there's a fellow there who lives on Capitol Hill. His name was Carl Hulse, a Washington correspondent for the New York Times. And we'd bump into Carl lots of times, this and that. I must say, he has a dog named Max. I wasn't too sure about that. But we joke, we talk, and all that. And finally I called up Carl and said, Carl, do you think Mel and I could meet Maureen? we'd sure like to meet Maureen. We're Maureen groupies. We just want to meet Maureen Dowd. And Carl said, sure, fine, no problem. And so we had dinner together on Capitol Hill, and that's basically how all this happened here tonight. So we're very honored to have them here. Carl, as you know, has been at the Times for over 30 years, Washington editor for a few years. He's Washington chief political correspondent for the New York Times. And of course, Maureen, all that she's written. She was named Glamour, the Women of the Year in Glamour, plus the Pulitzer Prizes, and the long, long list. But the real recommendation for her is she's timeless. She's just always there. And if you don't get tired of her, because she's always got something new and interesting to say. So let's give a big, big sky round of applause to Maureen Dowd and Carl Hulse.
Very nice. Very nice. Wow. That's great. You know, I'm a drummer in a band. This is actually sort of familiar to me, but I won't be playing drums here tonight.
So,
Thank you for
can I talk?
having us, and Maureen can speak. We'll be fighting the whole night here, so be prepared.
I wanted to say the same thing. Thank you. We love Missoula, and we love Montana, and we love the mountains. And we love Max, and we love Mel. And that's enough alliteration from an often irate Irish girl.
So I'm so happy to be here that yesterday I went through 5 airports and lost my luggage to get here. I'm sure that is not an unfamiliar experience to the citizens of Missoula. You guys know Lonesome Dove, you know, the great novel about the trail ride from Texas to Montana. Those guys had an easier time getting here than I did. You know, I also like hearing Senator Baucus because, you know, he didn't actually always want to answer my questions. I think sometimes I was too around for him, you know. Have at it. You're served, Maureen.
Okay. So, first of all, I want to ask Carl, who wrote the anonymous op-ed.
Ooh. All right, you guys ready? Could it actually be revealed here first? No way. No one would tell me. I'm the biggest mouth in Washington. There's no way that they would tell me who it was. What did you think of that?
Well, the funny thing is now, some of you might have seen on Amazon, it's a slutty Halloween costume.
How does that work?
Well, it's Times newsprint and then a big question mark. So I'm thinking of getting it for Halloween.
Millions of people read that thing, though, so it was probably the right thing to do to publish it.
So this op-ed scared everyone because everyone in Washington is already scared because it stated what people are afraid of, which is that Donald Trump is a danger to national security and that all of his aides will snatch things off his desk, agreements, and that they're working to make sure that our allies stay our allies and our foes, which Trump sometimes gets mixed up on. And so my question to Carl is, you know, these people who are kind of behaving this way in the Trump White House, are they heroes or traitors?
You know, that's a great question. And I think that they think they are heroes, but I wouldn't say they were traitors. But I think that there was a definite interest in some of the people in the White House to show that, by the way, they were there for you. They weren't. They were always working against the president. And you know, that's a questionable thing. That if you're gonna sign up and you're gonna work in the White House, you should probably be committing yourself and not undermining the administration. I still wonder if this was all just a big book plot. You know, I am Lodestar, $1 million book contract. I still think we're going to see that book at some point. I think that it was probably done in good faith, but a little sketchy.
Well, people were analyzing the language in it very carefully, and because the word lodestar was used a lot, they thought it was Vice President Pence, because he's the only person who uses that word. But when I covered Dick Darman, who was a very Machiavellian official in the H.W. Bush administration and the Reagan administration, he told me that when people in the White House want to give a mean, anonymous quote about one of their rivals or someone they want to get rid of, they intentionally lace in phrases that are commonly used by someone else they don't like and want to get rid of. So, for instance, he didn't like a White House official who always used the phrase "at the end of the day" on TV a lot. So when he wanted to have a mean anonymous quote, he would put in "at the end of the day," thinking he could kill two birds with one stone. So I don't know if the lodestar thing matters, but
Well, at the end of the day, we'll find out.
you're my lodestar, Carl. So obviously we're consumed with the Kavanaugh thing, and Carl is working on a book which started out to be the story of Mitch McConnell, how he blocked Merrick Garland, but now is also going to be Mitch McConnell getting through Kavanaugh. And, it's going to be an amazing book. Carl and I love Game of Thrones, and this is the ultimate cycle of revenge. This makes Game of Thrones look like Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. And I don't know how we're ever going to pull out of that. But so what are the politics surrounding the Kavanaugh vote now, and does it help the Democrats or Republicans?
Well, I think that's the big question that everybody in Washington has been consumed with. It's a very important job. Supreme Court, Associate Justice, although when you're the most junior justice, as it's been reported recently, one of your jobs is during the conference, you have to get up and answer the door if someone knocks. But I think the interesting thing about this is we're actually going to find out who this benefited in about a month. The Republicans think that this gave them a fairly good boost, and I'm sure that you're hearing a lot about this here in Montana with a big hot Senate race, that it's unified their base. They were having trouble ginning up enthusiasm among their base, and that this is going to help. My big question about this is that sustainable momentum over the next month? My experience, Senator Baucus could probably attest to this, is that voters don't usually reward you for doing the right thing. They punish you for doing it wrong. So the Republicans got their man through. The Democrats think that this is much more energizing for them. They're already hoping to ride a wave of women voters and women support. And I think the polls are already sort of validating that we're seeing a little bit more enthusiasm still among Democrats than Republicans on this. But, we're going to find out. And this is one of those things that won't be a mystery. It's a mystery. It's also a very unique situation. Midterm elections usually kind of roll in the same direction. This is a weird one. The House midterms are happening in suburban America, coastal America, Florida, where this is actually probably going to hurt Republicans, but the Senate races are all happening in places like here in North Dakota, red states. So you may get a thing where it works for both parties. I wrote about that. But I think the big question is, can Republicans sustain whatever momentum?
Carl has been covering Capitol Hill for 30 years, and I would say he's the most trusted journalist in Washington, I think. And one of the people who really trusts him and likes him is Susan Collins, and he did a great story. She told him how she came to that decision. And what do when you wrote about it, you said this is a decision that will haunt her for the rest of her career. And tell us about, behind the scenes, how Susan Collins feels.
Yeah, this was a really, in some ways people are making fun of her. She's really in a super hot spot right now. big portion of America who thinks she was a hero, and there's a big portion of America who thinks she's a total sellout. Not a great place to be for a politician. I do think this was something that she really thought about, invested a lot of time and effort into trying to figure out her position. But she started from the position that she wanted to vote for Kavanaugh. She needed to figure out a way to get there. And there were two things that I think are unappreciated in this for her. One, she thinks that whoever the next person would be much more conservative and probably not as good a choice. She herself is firmly convinced that Brett Kavanaugh is not going to overturn Roe v. Wade. And this is another one of these situations where she is now responsible for every decision Brett Kavanaugh makes for the rest of his career. They're going to say, well, Susan Collins did that. Tough position. I also think this has really not been, and I blame myself a little bit for this, Kavanaugh I consider to be not a Trump nominee, he's a W. He's Bush's nominee. He came out of the Bush White House. That's the kind of republicanism that Susan Collins is used to, accepts. That's what she's comfortable with. So she saw it from that direction. W called her like 3 times. She's actually been to Maine. I don't think this has been scoop here. She went to Maine and met with your former president, H.W. Bush. I covered him quite a bit. And I just think that at the end of the day, she had to come down for Kavanaugh, but boy, going to pay a price. I mean, Susan Rice, who really doesn't even live in Maine, is already talking about running against her. There's been a crowdfunding project that's raised like $5 million already to run against her. I mean, say what you want. She's tough. She knew that she was going to be on the griddle for this.
Yeah, somebody tweeted, we are never going to give Susan Collins another moment of peace in public for the rest of her life.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about Kavanaugh, and that's probably true. So Maureen, I'm sure people here who are familiar with Maureen's column are familiar with her brother Kevin, who writes an annual rebuttal to everything Maureen's written the entire year. Very few people actually in our business do that. So you've just been over in Monument Valley with your brother Kevin, and he's got an interesting attachment to Kavanaugh. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, you know, it was funny because during the 2016 election, all the other New York Times columnists would make these pronouncements and say, we need to understand this weird creature called the Trump voter. You know, we're going to go search them out in their habitats, and they'd all drive down to some cafe in Kentucky. They'd all end up in Paris, Kentucky, for some reason in the same cafe, and I would just go home to my family. I call my family my little basket of deplorables. But many months ago, before we knew that this was going to turn into a Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill redux, I had asked Kevin if he would like to go to Monument Valley for his birthday, because he's a huge John Ford, John Wayne fan. And so we had it all planned, and I didn't know it would be the weekend that this was decided. And I had written 2 pretty tough columns, and my sister kept saying to me, Kevin is going to cancel the trip. So every day before the weekend, I was waiting. If he canceled it, you know, I was going to ask Carl to go to Monument Valley. But he didn't, and we went to Monument Valley, and, you know, it just turned out to be this crazy weekend because we together watched Kavanaugh being sworn in. And so here's the weird part. Not only is Kevin a conservative, he was Brett Kavanaugh's high school basketball coach.
You might have heard that Brett Kavanaugh went to Georgetown Prep. I don't know.
Where all my nephews went. And so at the beginning of the Kavanaugh and in fact, Kavanaugh in his testimony defending himself the other day said, oh, I hung around with girls from Immaculata High School where I went. So, you know, I know this world. This is my world. And when Kavanaugh was first appointed, my brother and nephews were so excited, and everybody in my office was talking about transferring their sons to Georgetown Prep, because it was going to be this feeder school to the Supreme Court, because Neil Gorsuch had also gone there. And then, you know, within a couple of weeks, it was this gothic kind of Bill Cosby rape center, you know, so. So it was kind of dicey what was going to happen. Like, one of us was going to be, you know, upset. But anyway, so we were watching the swearing in, and Kavanaugh thanked his coaches, and Kevin started crying. You know, and I just haven't seen that since our mom died. And I think, you know, we're at a point in the country where it's almost impossible for each side to look at things from the other side's point of view. I mean, I have to do that because this is my family and I love them. And my older brother Michael died, and he was very upset with my W coverage. When I would go home for Thanksgiving, he'd say, you know, because I was criticizing the Iraq War, he'd say, you know, if there was a hurricane, you'd blame W. And then there was.
And we did.
And I did. And, you know, I think I was kind of in denial. You know, it really hurt me when he died to think that my job had kind of hurt our relationship, because I think your family is the most important thing. So Kevin and I have kind of vowed not to let anything like that happen. So we had a very nice weekend discussing John Wayne. So Carl, how much damage has all of this done to the Supreme Court and the Senate?
I mean, I think it's considerable. I think this is not a small thing that's going on. The Supreme Court, last session, I wrote a piece about the politicization of the Supreme Court, and some academics have actually proven by decision that this was the most partisan court ever. And the way it works, when we discuss this, is like you could tell whether a justice had been appointed by a Democrat or Republican, how they were going to rule. And this was the most definite it ever been. And people go, well, that seems strange, because there's always politics on the Supreme Court. But there's always been a crossover vote or two. There's always been a conservative Democrat, let's say, or a more moderate Republican. But now it's just getting locked in. And if you've followed this for the last few weeks, and most people have, that there's been this discussion of, you know, what is going to happen when they rule now, and people are going to react, because famously the Supreme Court, you know, they don't have an army. They have no way to enforce their decision. It's based on public confidence, public trust, and the willingness to do this. And I think as this goes on, it's a big problem. The Senate has been torn apart by this. They've had some bipartisan accomplishments, but this was pretty intense. I've been around a lot of big Senate fights, and you know, Mitch McConnell this weekend was trying to downplay it and say that we're going to get over this pretty quickly, but of course he needed to say that because he's been presiding over this. He can't be the person who says, boy, I just wrecked the Senate. You know? He's not going to say that. And there's been a lot of people over the years who've wrecked the Senate. It's been both parties on certain decisions. But I think this is going to linger for a considerable time. I mean, this is serious stuff, accusing Senator Dianne Feinstein of, you know, intentionally leaking this, which she didn't. I mean, wasn't that a moment at that hearing? I don't know how many people were watching when she turned around and was, did we leak that? I mean, not the kind of thing you usually say at an open hearing. So, yeah, I think this is serious stuff, and there's long-term repercussions. But Trump, let's talk a little bit about how Trump handled this whole thing. He was pretty quiet during Kavanaugh at the beginning, but then he sort of changed at the end. So what did you think of his performance?
Well, I was curious about how Trump was handling it behind the scenes, because we know that he got upset that Brett Kavanaugh when he went on Fox, was so subdued, and wasn't, you know, fighting and nasty. And the White House sent Kavanaugh word that if he wanted to save himself, he would have to do that. But the part I was curious about was, you know, Trump's brother died of alcoholism at 42, and he always told his kids, don't drink. And, you know, Trump himself only has one addiction. It's a bad one, unfortunately. But he doesn't drink, he doesn't gamble, he doesn't do substances. He is addicted to attention, which is why we're all in trouble. But, you know, it's interesting because I bet all of this discussion of beer and all this stuff about alcohol really, you know, had Trump rolling his eyes. But, you know, you could, it's interesting, when Trump started attacking Christine Blasey Ford, you know, I think Susan Collins, you know, was very upset about this and sort of had sent word, right?
Yeah, from the beginning.
Mitch McConnell not to do that. And, you know, it's embarrassing and degrading to watch the president do that. But on the other hand, other presidents have, you know, the attack on Anita Hill was directed from the White House, but other presidents let their henchmen do it, and Trump does his own wet work. So he's cut out the middleman, in other words.
And I think this goes a little bit to what I was saying, that Trump was not that enthusiastic about Kavanaugh. He wasn't on his original list of the 25, the famous list. He kind of maneuvered to get him on that list because Trump did see him as a Bush person. But once he was in, Trump likes nothing more than a win. And that ceremony at the White House, the swearing in, that was a very unusual Supreme Court swearing in. So at the end of the day, Trump thinks he got another notch.
So I'm curious how Mitch McConnell, who you know very well, is feeling now, and what's all this talk about him confirming a Supreme Court nominee in 2020 after famously stiffing Merrick Garland in 2016.
So I don't know how many of you watched Mitch McConnell on the Sunday shows this weekend, but there was a remarkable, sort of very subtle, in the weeds thing that went on, because Mitch came out, of course, in 2016. Aaliyah dies in February, Valentine's Day weekend, and nominates Merrick Garland. Of course, they sit on the whole thing. Senator McConnell the entire time says that the people need to speak. We have to let the people speak. This was kind of a created standard, but he got it through. So this weekend, he started saying, well, you wouldn't nominate, we wouldn't consider a Supreme Court nominee except if the Senate is controlled by the president's own party. So he's already totally setting the stage for doing it in 2020 if he has to. And it was a pretty remarkable turn, and I think you'll see more and more people start to call him on it. Chuck Grassley already came out and said, I wouldn't do that. Well, Chuck Grassley, famously friends of Maxwell, is not going to be the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in 2020 probably. So, I mean, this just shows you that Mitch McConnell's book was called The Long Game, and he's always playing the long game, and he's already setting the stage. And Trump said the other day he thinks he could appoint, maybe he could appoint 4 more Supreme Court justices, which was bad news to the people sitting on the court, because that means Trump thinks they're going to die, or something's going to happen. And I don't think he'll get 4 more Supreme Court justices, but he could get 1 or 2, and we'll see how that works out. I'm not sure we can take another one at this point, to tell you the truth.
So Carl, who is going to win the midterms? And isn't it weird that we don't have any idea who the Speaker of the House will be next year?
So this is the big question, right? I mean, I'm sure everybody is asking themselves, like, what's going to happen in the midterms? I have covered, this is like my 17th congressional election cycle. I've covered the flip of the House in '94 to the Republicans, 2006 to the Democrats, and 2000 back to the Republicans. This doesn't feel 100% like those where you really saw it coming, but it does feel like the Democrats in the House have a big advantage and have a really, really strong chance of winning, which of course will turn Washington upside down, changes the game in a million different ways. The Senate's a different deal. I think the Republicans still are the favorites, depending on what happens in races like this one. I would give the Democrats a really good chance to win the House and a not so good chance to win the Senate, although they seem to have a really good chance of beating Ted Cruz, and there's a lot of there's a lot of Republicans who would applaud that as well, but but not if it costs them the majority. So
if the Democrats do win, do you think they'll actually impeach Trump and impeach Kavanaugh?
I think they'll be too busy impeaching Trump to impeach Kavanaugh. It would be second. I honestly don't know. They certainly don't want to talk about it in the election. It's not a message that Nancy. Oh, I needed to answer your speaker. Not a message that Nancy Pelosi wants to send. But I do think, knowing Democrats, that they probably won't be able to stop themselves, and they'll work themselves in that direction. And the question Maureen asked about the speaker is actually a really interesting one, because no matter who controls the House, we usually know who's going to be actually running the House, but Paul Ryan's gone. There's a fight for the Republican leadership position. Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise. Can Nancy Pelosi do it again? I think she probably can, but it's not a sure thing. So after the election's going to be interesting. What goes on in Washington in the House after the election is going to be really interesting. And there's a whole nother little variable at work. There's a bunch, bipartisan group of House members who want to change the rules in the House to give members a little bit more say-so in what goes on. They're tired of being dictated to by the leadership. So about the 3 weeks after the election will be really interesting.
Carl has a very interesting theory about how we could get our first woman president.
Okay, so this is just a theory, but it's one. So I always say, all right, now say something happens to Trump with Mueller and Pence. So the Democrats win the House. Something happens with Mueller that knocks out Trump and Pence. I'm not saying that's going to happen at all, but Nancy Pelosi would then be the first woman president. And that would be fitting to Hillary, who she doesn't like at all, and to everyone. I mean, I just like to, I'm throwing that out there. It won't happen, but if it does, you're going to say, that Carl Hulse was a genius.
So does Trump secretly want the Democrats to win Congress so that he'll have a foil and an enemy
I
to
think
fight?
that you have to be careful of what you wish for. And I think Trump understands this. Trump has a great gut instinct for politics. And, and you already see him. He's talking about now the mob, and if the Democrats get in power, this is how they're going to act, and they're out of control. And I think it would set up a foil for him. But I think the trade-off would be a lot of investigation. So he probably has mixed emotions himself about that.
And is it true that the gender gap in the next election?
I mean, this election is all about the gender. The last number I saw was that Democrats have like a 30% advantage over Republicans among women. I think this election is really going to test the power of women voters. There's a lot of unhappiness. There's a lot of women running, as you know, and I think that if women can get out and show their force in this election, that it's going to be determinative, and it'll also show a lot about 2020.
Well, Trump is as in all things Trump, such a paradox, because he's sort of in many ways the worst thing that could happen to women and the best thing, because, we often discuss if Hillary Clinton had won, so many things would not have happened. Like, part of the reason the whole Me Too thing began cascading was because women were so angry about Hillary losing and Trump, a sort of self-confessed groper winning, that kind of propelled that. and he's put several women journalists on the bestseller list trashing him, and a record number of women running. You know, he's inspired. But Hillary and Eric Holder spoke out this week, and you know, I thought their comments were very interesting because they speak to the Democratic identity crisis. And Hillary was saying that you can't be civil to the Republicans because you can't be civil to a party that's trying to destroy us. And then Eric Holder was saying when Republicans go low, we have to kick them. Sort of the opposite of the Michelle Obama thing. So, I mean, which way should the Democrats go?
Yeah, I think this is always sort of the conundrum for Democrats, right? How hard do you fight back? And this is interesting to me because Kellyanne Conway, of course, was on TV today. I'm glad she's got fans here. And saying, it's so uncivil, she can't believe that Hillary would say this and she should apologize because her boss is the civil one. So I'm just throwing that out there. But here, I do think this about Hillary Clinton in this campaign. I think the Democrats in the midterm fight could probably use a little less Hillary and a little more Obama. I think that is where they need to go. Hillary Clinton, Republicans are just able to really grab onto her, and she is a polarizing force in their base, and you know, lock her up, and they're willing to do all that. Obama scares them. Obama has a different power to Republicans who worry about his influence. Even Trump is extremely careful about what he says about Obama. And I think that in certain places around the country, let's say Florida, you know, where there's a big governor's race, a lot of House seats up for play, a big Senate race, you know, this is where Obama, and I know there's some Obama strategists in here tonight, where he could really, I think, have an impact. And I think Obama probably needs engaged in this more than he is. And you know, as you know, he's a bit of a reluctant warrior. So, Maureen, you were a Shakespeare major in college. First time you interviewed Trump in the 80s was when Mikhail Gorbachev came to the U.S. to visit. Do a reduced Shakespeare where an entire play is summed up in one or two lines of Trump's relationship with Russia.
Okay, so here's an example of a reduced Shakespeare from Macbeth, for example. One man single-handedly ruins an entire country on the advice of three scary homeless ladies. So if you wanted to do a reduced Shakespeare on the Trump-Russia, you know, imbroglio, it would be Russian president despises nasty woman, decides to elect his buddy. So what do you think is going to happen with the Mueller probe?
You know, I have no idea. Mueller has run the most tight-mouthed, closed operation that we've seen in Washington in quite a while. I think he's got a lot of cards yet to play. I was at a meeting the other day. We had a big staff meeting. We were talking about this, and you know, we have all these Pulitzer Prize-winning reporters in the room who covered this Russia investigation. We went around and go, anybody know what's going to happen? They go, no. I said, well, maybe he'll come out 2 weeks before the election with a letter and change the entire election. But we don't think he's going to do that. It's hard to predict, but I think he's still got some cards. So Trump was laughed at the UN the other day, and that was the first time in American history that's happened. Trump's biggest worry and fear is that he's being laughed at and that the world was laughing at us. So is the world literally laughing at us now?
Well, they were that day, yeah. I mean, in England, Trump is known as the apricot toddler. It's so weird that Trump, you know, every time I'm on Fifth Avenue, I think this when I walk past Trump Tower. So this billionaire who lives in this gold palace on top of a building in the richest street in America somehow managed to connect with the most aggrieved, irritated segment of American society. It's just such an odd connection, but it's a strong connection. And Trump, even though, we had a story about his taxes the other day, so when he was a toddler, he was getting an income larger than mine. And by the time he was 8, he was a millionaire. So how does he have this sense of aggrievement and martyrdom that allows him to connect with, in particular, kind of white males who feel aggrieved? It's just a very weird connection. And the funny thing is, and he's thought this for decades, actually, that America's getting taken for a ride. In Breitbart and stuff, they use the word cuckolded, which is a great old Shakespearean word. But, America's getting taken for a ride. We're not getting what we deserve. People have to pay their debts to us. But the weird thing is, as a businessman, Trump was renowned for not paying debts. There were many real estate people and banks who wouldn't work with him. So it's just funny that now as a president, he's a debt collector. But yeah, people around the world are, I would say, the funny thing is Carl and I, when Trump was still speaking to me before he tweeted that I was a wacky, neurotic dope who didn't know him, Carl and I went to have lunch with him at Trump Tower during the campaign. And it was a really interesting lunch. And he, well, describe a little bit of it.
Trump, some of you are going to agree with this, some of you not, has personal charm. And he can come across in a setting like that as a very kind of, he's someone who knows how to convey that he's interested in you, whether he really is or isn't. My funny experience in that lunch was he was talking about going over to his golf course in Europe. He wanted to go to his golf course in Europe. And his staff was advising him not to do it. And he kept going, he kept asking me, shouldn't I go to my golf course? And I go, well, Mr. Trump, I'm with the New York Times. I really can't give you political advice. And then I caved at the end. I'm like, he keep asking me, I go, well, you know what? It's your golf course. If you want to go, go. So he goes over, and it's a disaster. It was the weekend of Brexit. The whole thing fell apart. He was just and I spent that whole weekend just waiting for him to go on camera and go, Carl Hulse of the New York Times said I could come over here, But he didn't do it.
We never thought he could win, not because Nate Silver said so, but because there were literally more pictures of himself and cardboard cutouts of himself than campaign workers in his campaign office there.
Yeah, he had it was like a skeleton staff, and
he was bragging about that.
Yeah, well, his whole argument was, I'm doing this with like 60 people, and Hillary has 700, and it's true. And we all looked at this and went, there's no way he can win. And Michael Cohen, I do laugh because this was my one big interaction with Trump. He's Michael Cohen was a bit player. He wasn't really around much. Well, he was around all day that day that we were there. So let's think about Trump in 2020. Can Trump get reelected?
Yes.
I think that's true.
I feel that at the moment the Democrats, to me, the problem with the Democrats is that the Clintons the party was the Clintons for 20 years, then the party was Obama for 8 years, and the Clintons and Obama did not do a good job of grooming people and bringing people along. To me, like Obama loved being the man alone in the arena. He wouldn't have anyone else on stage with him. And even after he left office, the New Yorker asked him what Democrats would be good to run for president, and he was having a hard time thinking of any. I don't think they pay enough attention to that. And I think they're making the same mistake that Hillary made, which is they think the awfulness of Trump means that they don't have to have exciting candidates and a great message and figure out what went wrong. I often think my dad stayed up all night the night Harry Truman was elected because he was so excited. He was a, police detective. And then my brother, who was a salesman, stayed up all night the night Trump was elected because he was so excited. And the Democrats have to figure out how that happened.
Incumbent presidents have huge advantages, and he's going to have a lot of advantages. And, we'll see how this midterm plays out. I think we'll learn a lot in the midterm. So, moving on to journalism a little bit, should we worry that reporters and newspapers in general have become heroin addicts for Trump? At his UN press conference, Trump said he thinks the Times will endorse him in 2020 because he knows how badly we all need him. Was he right about that?
Well, Trump's evil genius is that he does have a kind of bat sonar, and, he is right that Alfred Hitchcock said that the key to a great movie is a great villain. So the press has Trump as the villain, and we're selling a lot of newspapers, and cable TV is very rich, so they're giving a lot of print reporters contracts, and a lot of money is coming from this, and so we are his villain and he's our villain. And it's, I often say that the most intense, passionate, volatile, intertwined relationship is not Trump and Melania, it's Trump and the press, because he is the selfie president and we're the selfie stick, and he's Narcissus and we're the mirror. And I just think without the press, he would expire. He wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, Trump, for all of his attacks on us and the failing New York Times, he just loves to engage, right? So what do you have that?
Oh, yeah. So there was a funny tweet today by Michael Binder, who's the Wall Street Journal White House reporter. So President Trump's day yesterday included 30 minutes of remarks to the press with Nikki Haley, a personal news conference for New York Magazine's Olivia Nunzi, 15 minutes of remarks to the press before departing the White House, 35 minutes with the press aboard Air Force One, a local media TV interview in Iowa, a 75-minute rally.
Does that sound like a man who hates the press? He has taken over the briefing. They don't even do the briefing anymore because Trump is his own briefer. And of course, back in the day, he created alternative personas to
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was going to knock him out of the race. This is how naive I was when it came out. The Washington Post broke a story about how Trump used to have fake names and play his own press agent. Like he would call himself John Miller or John Barron, and he would call reporters and say, he would call the New York tabloid reporters and say, Madonna really wants Donald Trump. She really wants to get him into bed. Or Carla Bruni, just can't wait to get her hands on Trump. And then he would be quoted, said John Barron, a Trump spokesperson. I thought when that came out, people would think he was nuts, but it didn't even make a ripple among all the other things.
And you can hear it. Somebody had recorded it. There are some tapes
Yeah,
on
it's
YouTube,
recorded.
and you can hear it. And it's really Trump.
He doesn't even change his voice.
But he's talking faster, if you can believe that. So what do you think is different? I mean, you've covered a lot of presidents. What do you think is different about journalism in the Trump era compared to the other presidencies you've covered?
Well, of course, Trump is living in an alternate reality, and we have to, we're getting a lot of credit as journalists for doing our best to pierce that alternate reality, but he is not the first president to do fake news. Vietnam was fake news. The lead up to the Iraq invasion was fake news. But Trump adopted that term, which was first used in the 2016 election about Russian bots and that kind of thing. But in Trump's definition, fake news is news that he doesn't like about himself. So Trump doesn't really have any values or ideology to speak. It's basically his id. As Hillary said, an id with hair. And, so we're basically just covering a high chair king and his temper tantrums and this kind of thing, which is, you know, he's outside the norms. But I always say, to me, like someone like Dick Cheney, who worked within the norms and spoke in that very calm voice of a New England headmaster of a boys' school, and all the journalists respected him, and he had been a source to them. I think he was much more scary because it took years for journalists to cotton on to the fact that he was basically nuts, you know, and got us into this crazy war. And there's this movie coming up with Christian Bale as Dick Cheney, which should be interesting.
You know, about Trump, something you're saying, I wanted to mention this earlier. For all Trump's inconsistencies, the one thing he's been oddly consistent with his entire career is trade.
Yeah.
And he has been talking about a trade war for years. And he got elected, and no one actually thought he would do it. And he has managed to do it, you know, for the good and bad effects of it. And I think that is one thing that he just points at and says, all right, I actually got here. I'm doing what I said I would do against the advice of virtually everyone. And, you know, it's interesting. He got that deal with Mexico, and he has managed to pull that off. So let's talk about Mrs. Trump. So what did you think about Melania's visit to Egypt? And I know you had a special affinity for that appearance that she made over there.
Well, I was very excited because I've dubbed her the Slovenian Sphinx, and then she was at the Sphinx. So that was a big moment for me. But Carl had a little problem with her fashion.
I thought it was a little too Harrison Ford. I just did, you know. And actually, or the villain from that movie, you know, who steals the Indiana Jones. I just thought, this is me, and maybe this is sexist, I apologize, but when she says, pay attention to what I say and not what I wear, and then made a pretty big performance out of what she was wearing.
Well, the big question with Melania, which we try to figure, well, there are a few. We try to figure out if she actually lives at the White House.
Yeah.
Our photographers are always trying to figure out, because there were rumors that she had another house in Potomac, Maryland, near Georgetown Prep. No connection. And, but the other thing is, you know, is she trolling Trump? I mean, I think there's a liberal fantasy of her, which I don't go along with, but that somehow she secretly is seething. And you know, even one of my own editors said, why don't you do a story about how if Tom Steyer, you know, a Democratic billionaire, could pay off her prenup or something, then she could speak freely about Trump. And I was just like, I don't think she wants to speak freely about Trump. I think even if she and Trump were not to be married anymore, she wouldn't be giving a press conference.
Yeah, I think actually a lot of the comments that she made in the headline in the Times about this, it was sort of her most Trumpian appearance, really.
My Republican sister thinks they're madly in love, so I just want to weigh in with the deplorable,
I don't
you know.
about that.
So, but so people try and figure out if, like, after the grab 'em by the you-know-what tape, Hollywood Access tape came out, there was a debate, and she wore a blouse with a pussy belt, which, as it's known in Vogue, and people thought, is that a signal? Is she trolling him? And then when, like, LeBron James, you know, trashed Trump, then she tweeted something nice about LeBron James. So, you know, there's a lot of Kremlinology around Melania's tweets and statements and what she wears to see if she's signaling liberals that she hates Trump.
So I'm going to do a little lightning round of questions here, and then going to open it up for questions. But so Jared and Ivanka had dropped out a bit. What do you think's going on with them?
Well, I think that yeah, Nikki Haley said that Jared was a secret genius. So I think that they you know, thought it would be easy to kind of sweep into Washington and, you know, be these very glamorous players. And I was with them one night when they were, before the Saudi Arabian trip, when they were talking about bringing deliverables, which means weapons. And it was sort of chilling, because I'm thinking, do they really even know what they're talking about? But I think that Ivanka wanted to be seen as complimenting her father, but also countering him and making him kinder and gentler. And I think that is over, because when the children were separated at the border and they were bringing back children to their mothers, babies after a month covered in lice, and Ivanka not only couldn't influence her father, but couldn't even speak about it really. The idea that she was going to be this counterpoint, I think, evaporated.
Nikki Haley.
Oh yeah, Nikki Haley. Well, my conservative family wants her to run for president. They're
Against Trump?
no, after Trump. So I think that her timing was very good, because she and Jim Mattis are the only two people that I've seen so far who have escaped with their dignity intact. And so better sooner than
It was
later.
definitely a surprise, so no one expected it. And on one of my many legs of my flights to get here to Missoula, I was following the Nikki Haley story, and I'm like, what is going on with this thing? There's still something that I think that we don't know about that. The whole thing was a little bizarre. Mike Bloomberg for president.
Yeah, he, like Trump, he's now all into social media, and he announced on Instagram that he has registered as a Democrat, which means he's running for president. But, I have talked to him a lot about this over the years, and I think his problem before was that he commissioned a lot of polls, and the polls said he couldn't win. But I think sometimes if you really want it, you've got to jump in and throw your weight against history, because if you just are examining polls, they're not going to tell you all the variables and vicissitudes and wind shears that can happen in a campaign. So I don't know if he missed the moment last time, or do you think he would never have any chance?
Yeah, there's a famous line, this is from Mike Bloomberg himself, that is told a colleague of ours years ago about running for president. He says, yeah, guess what America wants? A Jewish billionaire, former mayor of New York, whose girlfriend is taller than he is. So,
But did they know they wanted, a reality TV apricot toddler?
I just think where the party is right now, I mean, Mike Bloomberg is a smart guy. I actually thought he gave a great speech at the convention. I just think where the party is right now.
But what's a funny thing to think about? I was talking to Jim Messina, who's very smart about this stuff, and we were saying, politics is like romance. Sometimes if you have a bad relationship, you search for the opposite the next time. So W, was all black and white, and people wanted something more cerebral and grays and nuance. And then with Obama, then as David Axelrod said, they got tired of that and they wanted black and white with Trump. But if you think about, so what's the opposite of Trump? If Trump is the baby and the high chair king, then you want the nanny. And who is the best nanny? It's Michael Bloomberg. He takes away your large sodas.
Mayors of New York never get elected to anything after that. So Saudi Arabia, you've been there, you've written about Saudi Arabia. We seem to be in a fix with them. I would say our relationship, I don't want to say tortured, but it's been very complicated over the years. Where do you think that's headed?
Well, this is the first time I ever talked to Trump was in 1987 when Mikhail Gorbachev came for his first visit to America. And I called Trump because he was one of a group of businessmen that was going to meet with Gorbachev. And before he went in, he goes, we have to be very careful with the Soviets. We can't trust them. We can't do a deal with them. They're untrustworthy. And then I called him after the meeting, and he goes, I love them. They told me to come build a Trump Tower in Moscow. They love me. I love them. So I realized the first time I ever talked to him that one compliment would completely turn him around. So the Saudis, understood this, and they Prince Salman wooed Jared, and they went for his first trip to Saudi Arabia, and they did the sword dance with him, and they all put their hands on the orbs with him. And, you know, while the rest of the world was scorning him, they made him feel good and respected. And so now, and because Jared is tight with Prince Salman, they're stuck in this relationship. And now the Saudis have killed this Washington Post journalist in the embassy in Istanbul. And the Washington Post put up a story tonight that Prince Salman is the one who lured him there. And maybe it was a rendition gone wrong. And Trump is kind of hemming and hawing. And also, you know, in Yemen, they're doing terrible things. So Trump's foreign policy is way too much based on flattery and compliments. And now we're stuck in this relationship where the Saudis think they can murder a Washington Post journalist, an enemy of the people. Okay, I have one for Carl. What's gone wrong with Lindsey Graham?
You know, that's a huge question in Washington now. Obviously, we've both known Lindsey for a long time. You cannot underestimate how profoundly John McCain's death has affected Lindsey Graham. Lindsey's father died when he was young. McCain was a surrogate father to him. And I think it's hard to think of John McCain as a controlling force, as a personality, but I think he was. I think Lindsey is really struggling with that, and we're seeing it right now. He's acted pretty...
Is he going to be the Attorney General?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think he likes me.
So last week, the Times published this massive 13,000-word piece that took over a year to report, which showed that contrary to Trump's origin myth, that he just got a small loan of $1 million from his father, he actually was given over $400 million in a massive family tax fraud that started from the day he was born. Will any of this ever catch up to Trump, and does it really matter with voters?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's funny how that tax story was just this exquisitely reported and written piece, and you know, it happens during the middle of the Kavanaugh things. Maybe we could have timed it better, but I think one of the problems with it, in terms of it not sinking in, but it still could, is that this is kind of what people expect, and despite everything that we were able to document in there, that kind of, you know, they've sort of made up their minds about Trump and his financial. And this didn't stun anyone. And another weird thing that Jack Schaefer, media columnist, pointed out, Politico in his own way, but that, you know, part of the things that make a story go now is the ability of other news organizations to match it. And we had done such a phenomenal job, and it was so exclusive, no one else could even write about it and kind of keep it going.
And finally, what about Tester?
Oh, you know, the House race I really don't know much about, although I do remember that the incumbent was involved in some incident here. But you know, I think Tester's got a pretty good chance in a difficult environment. I think he's a guy who suits the state, and he's sort of run that kind of campaign. You know, I haven't seen John Tester hamleting all over the place about which way I'm going to vote. I think on certain things, I think he's made his decision to run kind of as the guy he is and let the chips fall, maybe the cow chips, fall where they may. So anyway, that's what we've got planned. And we're open for questions. I think some people have microphones, or no, is there? Oh, right there. I guess we should probably go over to the mic. And two at the aisles. You guys seem eager.
I appreciate your
wary.
I appreciate your remarks very much. I'm particularly interested in how we can be an informed citizenry and at the same time be force-fed every single word out of the giant baby's mouth.
Well, I mean, we talked about that earlier today with some journalism students. I think You know, I get this. We've been torn about this, but people said, well, do you have to cover every tweet? Do you have to cover? And I said, you know, the guy's president of the United States. But I do see a little bit of a change in the last 10 days. Fox hasn't even been covering the rallies. And I think that's irritating Trump a little bit because, you know, he was name checking every Fox person in this rally the other night, I think trying to get them to pay attention to it. But he is the president of the United States. And, you know, we're gonna cover him. I think that we don't cover every tweet, and we don't cover, you know, even with President Obama, you know, we didn't cover everything they say. I do think that we have
That's what I was just going to point out.
Yeah. No, and I do think that we have gotten a little more judicious in covering everything. But I get your point, but sometimes you need to pay attention to what this guy, the
Well,
president, said.
I agree with you that we need to have a focus on the ridiculousness of it, but enough is enough.
All right, point taken. I guess we'll just go back and forth.
Hi, welcome to Montana.
Thank
Thank you.
It's awesome here.
My question is probably a little bit broader than that. I consider the free press the fourth estate and so very important to the functioning of our government. I am more worried about the state and future of our democracy than I've ever been in my life. I see a president who does things that are scary, that are, people keep waiting for him to make the shift, to be the president and not be the tantrum person. I see a broken Congress. I see the gamesmanship with the Supreme Court. I see the press being denigrated to the point that I'm not sure a lot of Americans believe there is, you know, an unbiased source we can turn to. And now I see the judiciary, not just the Supreme Court, but all the justices that have been appointed. I'm not back in D.C. I'm just out here in Montana trying to keep up with things. So you guys have a lot of experience. Tell me, should I be as worried as I am?
Well, that's an easy one. I mean, I will say this, Maureen can answer that. I'm an extremely optimistic person by nature, and I'm not that optimistic right now, unfortunately. I think that we're going through a difficult period, and I think it's going to go on for a while. And as these things go, it may get worse before it gets better. I'm just being honest. I mean, there's a lot of tension going on right now in this country. The court, that's a big thing. The institutions are being challenged. When it all started, I thought, oh, well, you know, things will be okay, because they're always kind of okay. I just hate to say it, I'm not that sure they're okay. I said today at the journalism class, you know, I love the First Amendment, obviously. It's kind of basis of both of our careers. But I've always kind of taken the media's fascination and with the First Amendment, you know, it's like, oh, okay, there's other institutions that are going to stand up as well. You know, I'm not sure. But I think we'll get through it. But, you know, there's a lot of people in this room, obviously, who were here for the 60s and 70s. America, every once in a while, goes through some rough stuff, and maybe we're in it right now. I just hope it can get straightened out.
I have a two-part question. The first, we hear a lot of speculation here that our governor, Steve Bullock, is eyeing a run at 2020 for the presidential race. Is that a name you've heard thrown around as somebody who maybe could defeat Trump? And if not him, who are some top people on your list that you think might run on the Democratic ticket?
So who are the top Democrats?
Yes. Have you heard of Steve Bullock as a name
Every Democrat in the U.S. Senate is running for president right now. You know, that's the great line that every senator looks in the mirror in the morning and sees a president. I think the party's got a long way to go to figuring out who their nominee's going to be. I mean, you've got a governor here who's been talked about being in the mix. You've got, you know, John Hickenlooper in Colorado, but Elizabeth Warren, you got Bernie, you got Hillary, right? My personal favorite is The Rock. I'm kind of pulling for The Rock. But no, I think the party is nowhere near right now figuring out who their nominee is. And I think they're going to be a little bit like the Republicans were the last time, where there's just going to be this lineup. You're going to see these debates with 20 Democrats standing there and sorting themselves out. I do think the party is in a very difficult moment trying to figure out what the party actually stands for right now. Is it the party of Elizabeth Warren, or is it the party of Governor Bullock, right? Where is this going? And I think this will probably be a pretty difficult process. And if I knew who the Democratic nominee would be, I would be running to Vegas right now. But I have no idea. But it's going to be interesting. But it's a real moment for the Democrats to kind of decide who they're going to be.
As a woman prior to me once mentioned, we've been waiting to see Trump kind of change and form into this presidential character, but we've also, I think we were all expecting to wait and see him conform into the Republican Party, but something more surprising happened, I think, and that's that the Republican Party seemed to kind of conform and acquiesce to him. Do you think that this is a temporary change to somewhat appease the administration, or is this going to have lasting impact on the party?
I'm glad you reminded me, because what the story I was going to tell you about the lunch we had at Trump Tower was at that point when he was still running, or at that point he was headed toward the nomination. And I said to him, are you going to pivot? That was what everyone wanted to know. And he went like this and went like a little kid who wouldn't eat his vegetables, like, no pivot.
No pivot.
No pivot, And at the time, Carl and I were like, he could never be president if he didn't try and act more presidential. And then we thought he could never be a popular president, even with his base, if he wasn't acting more presidential. But in the end, the weird thing about it is and I guess this is the power of extreme malignant narcissism, he has forced the world and his party to pivot to him. Everyone else has kind of adjusted to him, even to the point of serving him hamburgers, at state dinners abroad and stuff. Like, he's forced everyone else. So, Carl, what do you think about the Republicans?
Well, the party, it has totally, you kind of have it right. They have become the party of Trump. I don't think that there's any dispute about that right now. You can't, if you're in the Republican Party and running for office, generally speaking, unless you're at a super swing district or state, you cannot pull away from Trump. And you see what the Republicans are talking about. Lisa Murkowski, right, on Kavanaugh. Vote of conscience in many respects. She had some local issues that were a problem for her. Trump says she'll never live this down. The Republican Party up there is saying that they're going to censure her. So the message has been sent. If you break away from Trump, you're going to get Twitter bashed. They're going to spend money against you. They're going to primary you. I don't know how long this lasts, and what happens when if Trump is gone. Where they go. They were the Tea Party for a while. The Republicans have been responding to these populist movements over the last few election cycles, and they think this is something that works for them right now. I do think that if the elections go really bad for them, there'll be some rethinking of that. But right now they're hooked to Trump.
Somebody had a funny tweet where it's like Trump has made the Republicans the party that doesn't like the NFL and the FBI and does like the Russians and black rappers.
Yeah.
And how did that happen,
Yeah, it was funny. I went to Mitch McConnell right after the first days of the administration and the travel ban, and I went into Mitch McConnell and I said, wow, people are expecting you to act. Are you going to save the country? And he's like, what are you talking about? He goes, I'm happy Trump's acting like a Republican. They were worried he was going to come in and be a Democrat. That had all been a phony election. So, we've all talked about this. There's a lot of trade-offs. They've got two guys on the Supreme Court now. To Mitch McConnell, if he loses the majority in November, it will still have been worth it. Although I don't think that's probably going to happen, but it'll have been worth it.
But do you think that these changes that are happening in the party are here to stay, or are they just temporary to appease him? I mean,
All
we heard.
politics is temporary, right? Whatever
Yeah.
works. I don't know.
I don't think the part about Putin is here to stay. I think that is unique and mysterious about Trump. Someday maybe we'll find out why, but he's dragging along the party on that. And Nikki Haley, you know, that was their fight that a few months ago when she was talking about tougher sanctions on Russia, and they pulled her back and said she was mistaken, and she snapped back and said, I don't make mistakes.
I mean, the one thing that has actually fired up the Republicans against Trump that I've been watching is the trade war, because it's so counter to their orthodoxy. These are the free traders, U.S. Chamber, Mitch McConnell, and but even though that's happened, it's still very popular within the base of the party, and so they've even kind of quieted down about that.
But also, W's whole effort was to make the party friendly to Hispanics, you know? So,
It seems like there are many parallels between George Bush, W's first term, and Trump's first term here. And to not have history repeat itself with a Trump win in 2020, what lessons can the Democrats learn from the John Kerry loss in 2004?
Go to Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. You might want to do some of that. I think the Democrats learned a lot of hard lessons in that election that they won't repeat, and I already see a lot of signs of that, that they're going to really push in some of these places. I mean, the Democrats, Jim's here somewhere, but they thought they had built an entirely new coalition that could still encompass their old coalition of blue-collar workers in industrial states, and they totally lost the message there. And I think that you're seeing a lot of effort to rebuild that. I don't think, there was just too much being taken for granted by the Democrats in that last election, and that Supreme Court seat was one of them. Merrick Garland was sitting there. The Democrats could have put up a much tougher fight. They just assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win and they were going to get that guy in. Not only did they not get that guy in, that vacancy elected Trump because he was able to use that to leverage the evangelical people who were nervous about that. There was a lot of things that had to happen for Trump to get elected, and they did. And I think the Democrats will be extremely careful the next time. But
tell
they
about
gotta
the
find
6
some-
out of 7 popular vote.
Yeah, I mean, so what the Democrats have won 6 out of the last 7 popular votes and had one or
But 2 of them haven't been able to serve.
Right. And,
And here's an interesting historical footnote. 2 popularly elected Democrats didn't get to the Oval Office because they didn't follow Bill Clinton's advice. Al Gore did not let Clinton, wanted to go campaign for him in Arkansas and Tennessee, and Al Gore was angry about Monica Lewinsky, so he said no, he couldn't. And then Bill Clinton begged Hillary's campaign manager, Robbie Mook. He said, I know there's something wrong with the rural white vote. He's the world's leading expert on that vote. Let me go campaign, figure out what it is. Robbie Mook literally, in a Southern accent, made fun of what Bill Clinton was saying to reporters. The Boston Globe reporter told me Robbie Mook was making fun of Bill Clinton. And he said, we've got all our big data, but their big data, was off because they were starting with an assumption that turned out to be false, that they would win every vote that Obama won. So it's starting with this stupid assumption. And, I highly recommend Amy Chosik's book, Chasing Hillary, because she has an amazing scene at the end on election night, and Hillary and Bill are in their matching purple Ralph Lauren custom-made outfits in some fancy New York hotel, the Peninsula or somewhere, very expensive, that, as Amy Chosik points out, is not a union hotel, which Democratic nominees usually stay at election night. And they had one of these genius big data guys who was so smart they compared him to the Russell Crowe character in A Beautiful Mind. And he comes into the suite and says, well, our model in Florida was off. And they're like, what do you mean? And he said, the model was just off. And they said, okay, well, we still have Pennsylvania. And he goes, well, if the model was off in Florida, it's off everywhere. So much for big data. So, you know, the vote for president is the most human vote. It's like your future, your children's future, life and death, what happens in our lives. And to just dismiss it as a demographic foregone conclusion, which is what Hillary's campaign manager did, was not wise.
As a young person, I've never lived through an election cycle without seeing the huge impacts of social media, and specifically Twitter. I just wanted to ask how and how much has Twitter impacted your specific places in journalism?
Maureen wrote a column. When was that, about how terrible Twitter was so long ago?
Oh, no, when it first started, I went out to San Francisco and interviewed the founders, and Biz Stone, and very charming young guy. And at that point, I was never going to get on Twitter, and I said to him I would rather be tied to a stake in the desert and have honey poured over my body and have red ants eat out my eyes than be on Twitter. And he goes, well, if you're ever in that situation, you're going to need Twitter to, say help. Twitter has changed everything. You know, it's so weird that Trump is is he our oldest, or he's right up there with Reagan?
Yeah.
And yet he's the first one to use social media to not only help him get elected, but he makes policy on Twitter. I mean, Twitter is completely shaping his presidency. And, journalists or we were talking to journalism students today, and I was just telling them to be careful, because we had a situation the other day where one of our legal writers for the magazine was a byline on a story about the Brett Kavanaugh throwing ice at the bar in Yale. And then conservatives looked up her Twitter feed, and it turned out she had announced at the very beginning that she was opposing Kavanaugh, and yet her byline was on a news story, and the Times had to apologize. And we've made a bunch of new rules about social media. So, it's Twitter is an amazing place and a great tool in journalism, but it's also a treacherous place. And Carla and I have a rule: never tweet after 10. Not once you've had a glass of wine, forget it.
Yeah, I hate Twitter. I think it's terrible. I'm at Carl Hulse for those who want to follow me.
Carl is
I need some
Carl
followers.
is very witty on Twitter.
Actually,
He is.
Twitter, I said this earlier tonight, social media is like a curse in some ways, and it's just such a mean place. And as I said, that it's like the accelerant that's thrown on the fires that are already out there, and people just get so fired up. Maureen and I have this joke that at some point, everyone's emails are going to be made public. It's going to destroy all their relationships, and we're going to turn off the internet and start over. So we'll see if that happens.
Well,
Time for a couple more questions, I think.
Well, one thing that I try and figure out about Twitter is, was Trump possible because Twitter had already coarsened our culture and made it meaner, or did Trump make our culture meaner? It's interesting. The scariest thing I've heard so far is Jared Lanier, who's a friend of mine, Jared Lanier. He just wrote a book called 10 Reasons to Close All Your Social Media Accounts. He was one of the founders of Silicon Valley. He invented virtual reality. And he said he's been observing Trump very carefully as president, and that he thinks that all of his tweeting has reshaped his brain and made him much more negative. And Twitter announced last month that they changed their algorithm to reward the negative and to reward brawls on Twitter. So, the idea that Trump's brain is being reshaped by Twitter, Jaron calls them behavior modification empires. He's very down on Google and Facebook. He thinks, we're just turning over all our precious bodily fluid DNA to these people who are just only interested in making money on us and not protecting us.
Don't let Twitter reshape your brain. Okay, we're going to answer your guys' questions, and then I think we have to wrap it up.
I had a couple questions actually, but I'll just pick one. You were just talking about Facebook actually, and I heard the other day that Trump had requested all of our Facebook information, anybody that was against him or any group against him. And I'm wondering what the chance of him actually getting that is, and if there's anything that you can do, constitutionally to fight that. That's my first question, I guess.
You mean conservative, anti-conservative bias? Is that?
He said anybody that's anyone that opposes any of the groups that oppose him on Facebook, the White House has requested all that personal information. That was on the news the other day, so I just wondered if you haven't heard it.
I don't know.
Okay, then. And my second.
I'm not on Facebook.
Well, that wasn't on Facebook. That was on, I think it was Rachel Maddow. It's one of the shows. But the other question I had is, I heard that when Jared Kushner went to Saudi Arabia, he stayed up all night, talking with the prince, and that he had actually given him things that he'd heard in the daily briefing, the security briefing, gave him information on who was, talking against him and now with this journalist being killed, I just wondered how much truth there might be to that, and why was he able to get his security clearance back? And why was he able to look at things secure without a security clearance?
I think that Kelly kind of had taken that away from him to cause trouble for Jared. He didn't like Jared, and that they put the pressure back on it. And that's a presidential decision. I'm sure that Trump says that he probably didn't make that decision, but if they decide you're going to have a security clearance, you will have a security clearance.
Like, how can you give information you got from it to a Saudi prince? Like, how is that just so casual?
Not good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That happened.
Yeah, that did happen. Sure.
Well, we thank you for sharing all your insights and your stories tonight. Okay. That was okay. All right.
Thank you.
So my question was getting back to your little vignette about talking with your family and the beliefs they hold dear in spite of facts. Are there any, either on the Republican side or the Democratic side, a tightly held belief like that you would wish would go away so we could bring people and our country back together?
You mean that? What do you mean exactly?
Well, when you said that you have a family member who says that they believe that Trump and Melania are happily married. If there is a persistent delusion out there in public discourse that you just wish would say, no, stop following that, or stop talking about that, that would help bring the country back together, is there one that you would want to go away?
Yeah, I don't know. My sister has switched back and forth. She voted for Jimmy Carter and she voted for Obama, but then she did not vote for Trump. She voted for me because she didn't want to vote for Hillary either. And so, I think she could be lured. My brother, no, because, in the New York Times building, as Carl has said, we could sit here for another 5 hours and tell you what happened in the New York Times building on election night. It really should be a movie like Recount. And we had no Trump editorial prepared. We had a huge special section about Hillary prepared. We had the headline, Madam President, in type, and at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock that night, people began writing the stories that we had to write when the little fuel gauge went the other way. I was so dumbfounded. All I could do was take a picture of the little fuel gauge as it went to 85% Hillary to 85% Trump. But that night I called Kevin because the whole building we were talking about it in the past tense. You know, I did not have faith in big data because, as I've said, I think it's more Shakespearean. It's about emotions and humanity, but everyone seemed to have so much faith in it. So when it happened, I called Kevin and I wrote up what he said and put it in the paper, and that was the only insight we had into how they felt. And I said that night, why did you and your family vote for Trump? And he said, I want less regulation and I want a conservative Supreme Court. And, you know, trigger warning here, Kevin, I said, how can you put up with when Trump, you know, like when he was so humiliatingly, you know, fawning over Putin and all this stuff? And Kevin said, you know, it's like dating someone bipolar. Yeah, he's crazy sometimes, but I just wait for that to pass so we can get back to the Supreme Court. So I don't, you know, I'm just not sure what the common ground is going to be on that.
I mean, you know, the one thing I wish is that both sides would quit believing that everything the other side does is inherently evil and misguided. I do think that that is a big disconnect in this country, that everybody looks at the other side and says, these guys are terrible. You know, there's bad faith, but there's obviously some good faith among all those people. And I do think that we need to get past that. And Senator Baucus, you know, when he was able to work in that middle ground there. And, you know, I think we need a little more of that. And it's getting difficult to get there. You got to be able to believe the other side has a legitimate view at some point. One last question. I know that.
Why do you think Trump has alienated all of our, well, a good portion of our allies and decided to partner the U.S. with some of our enemies? Why do you think that is?
That is the question of the ages, right? I mean,
you know, I call his biographers and ask them this all the time because it's confusing even to Republicans, you know. But, you know, they kind of go with the Freudian thing that his father taught him that there are either you're a killer or a zero. And he watched his brother not be able to be a killer, and he was able to take his older brother's place in the Trump organization and rise in his father's estimation, you know, by being a killer and not a zero. So one of his biographers said he has this outsized admiration for sort of almost a caricature, manly, masculine, you know, chesty kind of chest-thumping leaders. So, like, he's attracted to authoritarians, which is just super weird to watch an American president be attracted to authoritarians. And then, like, he goes to our allies, and with Theresa May, he was actually staying at Chequers, and he was trashing her to a British reporter while he was her guest. You know, so it's crazy. It is really crazy, but either it's that his father instilled this kind of weird thing in him that makes him attracted to authoritarian personalities, or Putin has something on him that the Russians lend him a lot of money or some other kind of blackmail.
Well, what does that have to do with North Korea, though? If the Russians have something on him, why is he allying us with North Korea?
I know, he says he loves
very
North Korea.
disorienting. That love, we fell in love, was one of the weirdest things
it is.
I have ever heard
It is
in
so
my life.
weird.
It was just weird. Come on.
It's weird.
But he gets carried away at these rallies and just says some stuff, and it's like, you could see he was spinning that out, and it was just bizarre. Can you imagine Obama? Come on. That's all you gotta think. Listen, you guys.
I think that's actually, you know, I think that's a thing about Obama, because in their meeting after Trump got elected, Obama told him that North Korea was the thing he had to worry about the most dangerous thing, the scariest thing. And I think Trump got in his head, oh, I can be better than Obama on this,
I love
you know.
the guy. We fell in love.
Yeah, they're in love. They're in love.
It's just weird. I'm sorry.
Thank you guys. You're amazing.
We love Montana. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I got to take a picture. Thanks a